Story 1. I lived in an old rectory in the southwest of the UK next to an ancient church. The house was from the 1600s, big, cold, and full of strange creaks that I tried not to think too much about. I lived there with 4 other students, and we'd all heard things at one point or another. Doors opening, footsteps on the stairs when we were all in the same room. Creepy, sure, but we always brushed it off. Old houses make noises, right? That summer, I stayed behind after the semester ended. I'd gotten a job nearby and couldn't afford to rent another place, so I had the house to myself for a couple of months. It wasn't ideal being alone in a house that big, but I figured I'd get used to it. For the first few nights, it was fine. A bit eerie, but nothing out of the ordinary. The house was old, and old houses make sounds, pipes knocking, wood settling, that kind of thing. I slept with my door locked, but that was more out of habit than fear. Then came the night I'll never forget. It was late, probably around midnight. I was in the living room watching TV. The house was silent except for the low hum of the fridge in the kitchen down the hall. I had a single lamp on, casting a dim yellow glow over the room. It was one of those heavy, still nights where the air felt thick, like a storm was about to break. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not creaks, not the sound of wood shifting. Actual footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from above me. The bedroom directly over the living room had been used by one of my housemates before they moved out. It was empty now. The sound wasn't distant or muffled. It was clear, like someone was walking across the wooden floor in boots. I turned off the TV. The second the sound cut out, I could hear it even better. The footsteps weren't rushing. Whoever, or whatever, was up there was walking in slow, careful strides, as if pacing. My stomach clenched. I sat there, gripping the armrest of the chair, staring at the ceiling. The sound moved, heel toe, across the room above me. Then it stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. I swallowed, straining my ears. Nothing. For a second, I wondered if I had imagined it. Maybe I was just tired, my mind playing tricks on me. I was alone in an old house after all. Then without warning, bang. A single deafening slam from upstairs, like someone had taken a door and thrown it shut with everything they had. The walls shook. I jumped to my feet, my heart hammering. Every door up there should have been closed. I knew that for a fact. I checked them earlier that evening. And even if one had somehow swung open, there was no draft, no open windows. No reason for it to slam like that. Adrenaline took over. Before I could think, I was already moving, charging toward the staircase. I don't know what I expected to find. Some part of me still clung to logic. Maybe a window had come loose. Maybe an animal had somehow gotten in. But as I reached the top of the stairs, my breath caught in my throat. Every single door on the landing, 6 of them, was wide open. I knew they'd all been closed. I knew it. The air was different up there. Colder, heavier. The hallway stretched in front of me, lined with doorways leading into dark, empty rooms. My skin prickled as I took a slow step forward. Hello? My own voice sounded small, ridiculous. Silence. I walked to the first door, the one that had been directly above the living room. I hesitated, then reached out and pushed it fully open. Nothing. Just an empty room. The wooden floor looked normal, undisturbed. There was no one there. No way anyone could have hidden. I backed out, my pulse still racing. One by one, I checked the other rooms. Empty, silent, nothing out of place. I stood there in the hallway, my hands shaking. Then from downstairs, bang! I flinched so hard I nearly stumbled. It had come from the living room. The same exact sound. A door slamming shut. Except I hadn't left any doors open. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whatever this was, it wasn't staying in one place. I didn't run. I wanted to. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to bolt, to get the hell out of that house. But I forced myself to move slowly, carefully, as I descended the stairs. The living room was just as I had left it. The lamp still on, the TV off. No doors open, no doors closed. Nothing. But the feeling, that heavy, charged air, was worse now, like the house was waiting. I stood there gripping the banister, my ears strained for any sound. any movement. And then, so quiet, I almost didn't hear it. A single footstep, right behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I don't even remember running, but the next thing I knew, I was outside, standing in the cold night air. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely get my phone out of my pocket. I called my friend, barely able to get the words out. I didn't go back inside that night. I crashed on my friend's floor, fully dressed, every light in the house on. The next morning I went back with him. Everything looked normal. The doors upstairs were shut again. The house felt still. But I packed my bags that day, called my landlord and told them I was leaving early. I didn't care about the money. I just couldn't stay there. I don't know what was in that house. I don't want to know. But whatever it was, it knew I was alone. And it wanted me to know that too. I never went back. Story 2. I don't know how to explain what happened to me at Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. I don't tell the story often because, honestly, it sounds like something you'd hear in one of those ghost hunting shows. And I don't want to be lumped in with people who chase orbs and blurry shadows. But this was different. It wasn't just a feeling. It wasn't a bad battery or a weird sound in the distance. It was something I saw. And to this day, I don't know what the hell I was looking at. I was a college student at the time, taking a folklore class. Our final project was pretty open-ended. We had to research a local legend, gather first-hand accounts, and document our findings. I chose Bachelor's Grove because I'd grown up in the south suburbs, not far from it. If you Google it, you'll see what I mean. It's supposedly one of the most haunted cemeteries in the country. The stories range from glowing orbs to phantom cars to full-body apparitions. I didn't really buy into all that, but I figured it'd be an easy project. I'd go, take some pictures, talk to a few people, and be done. I went on a Sunday afternoon, parked at the entrance to the forest preserve, and walked the half-mile path to the cemetery. If you've never been, it's not like a normal cemetery. It's small, maybe an acre, and completely overgrown. A lot of the headstones have been knocked over or stolen, and the whole place has this weird, forgotten feel to it. Trees and vines have crept into the burial plots, and the iron fence that used to surround it is long gone. It's not kept up by anyone, just left there, hidden in the woods. I brought 2 cameras with me, a digital point and shoot and an old video camera that recorded onto mini tapes. I wanted to document everything, but the second I stepped through the broken gate, my digital camera shut off, just completely powered down. I frowned, checked the battery, fully charged. It wouldn't turn back on. Annoying, but whatever. I still had the video camera. I wandered around, filming the graves, trying to get a sense of the place. The air was heavy, muggy, still. I was the only one there, which wasn't surprising. Most people don't come alone. About 10 minutes in, my video camera cut out. No warning, no low battery, just dead. I checked the tape, shook it a little, turned it off and on, but nothing. Now I was pissed. I needed footage for my project. I walked back to the entrance of the cemetery, and the second I stepped out, like literally the second I crossed the threshold, the digital camera blinked back to life. I pulled out the video camera, flipped it on, working. I stepped back into the cemetery. Both died again. At this point, I was just frustrated. I'd heard stories about electronics failing in the grove, but I figured they were exaggerations. It wasn't until a woman, middle-aged, carrying a backpack, walked up the trail that I got some kind of explanation. "You having issues with your camera?" she asked, nodding at the one in my hand. "Yeah," I said. "It keeps shutting off." She smiled knowingly. "It happens. They feed off the energy. Just walk out to the path. They'll turn back on." I stared at her. "Who feeds off the energy?" "The spirits," she said matter-of-factly, like she was talking about the weather. "They drain batteries, cameras, recorders, anything electronic." I didn't know what to say to that. I wasn't into paranormal stuff, but I couldn't argue with what had just happened. I thanked her, left the cemetery, and sure enough, my cameras turned on like nothing had happened. At that point, I just wanted to finish what I'd started. I went back in, this time using my phone to take pictures instead of relying on my digital camera. I snapped a bunch: graves, trees, the broken down fence. I didn't see anything unusual. That night I went through my photos. I was hoping for something. An orb, a weird mist, whatever. I didn't find anything. Disappointed, I put the project aside and forgot about it for a few days. Then during class, I was flipping through the pictures again, half paying attention, when I saw something that made my stomach drop. In one of the photos, taken near the back of the cemetery, there was a shape among the trees. At first, I thought it was just shadows or leaves playing tricks on my eyes. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. It was a man, not a person standing there, but something wrong. His outline was distinct, broad shoulders, a head tilted slightly to the side. His features were muted, blending with the tree bark. But I could make out two dark spots where his eyes should have been. And, this part made my skin crawl, there was something on his shoulder. It looked like an animal perched there, its head resting against his. It had the shape of a cougar, big and heavy. I stared at the picture, trying to make sense of it. It had to be an illusion, leaves and shadows forming something that wasn't really there. But the more I looked, the more I felt like it was looking back. I decided to go back. 2 days later, I went to the same spot, stood exactly where I had taken the picture. I looked into the trees. Nothing. No shape, no figure, no animal. I took more photos, checked them immediately. They were normal, but as I stood there, staring into that empty space, I felt it. I don't know how to describe it. It was like being watched, but worse. Like something was aware of me. Like I had seen something I wasn't supposed to, and now it saw me too. A wave of nausea hit me. My hands started to shake. I don't know if it was fear or adrenaline or something else, but I suddenly had the overwhelming urge to leave. I turned and walked out of there, not looking back. Story 3. I've never been the kind of person to believe in ghosts. Never really bought into all that supernatural crap. Spirits, hauntings, things that go bump in the night. I've always figured that if something weird happened, there was a logical explanation for it. A trick of the mind, bad lighting, maybe just being tired. That was before Christmas at my in-laws' house. My wife's family lives in a small town a couple of states away from us, in one of those old houses that's been around for 100 years or more. It's a 2-story place, narrow hallways, creaky wood floors, those old-fashioned doorknobs that rattle in their sockets when you turn them. The kind of house that makes noise just by existing. We stayed there for a week. The whole family crammed into the place. Her parents, her 2 younger brothers, her sister and husband, and their kids. It was a full house, loud, chaotic, but that's just how the holidays go. The night it happened, everyone had already gone to bed. It was late, maybe a little after midnight, and I was the last one up. I'd been sitting in the living room for a while, scrolling on my phone, just enjoying the quiet. Eventually, I got up to take a shower before bed. The bathroom was small, just a single sink, a toilet, and a clawfoot tub with a shower curtain. No window, so after a few minutes of hot water, the mirror fogged up completely. I finished up, turned the water off, and opened the door a crack to let the steam out while I brushed my teeth. I was mid-scrub, toothbrush in hand, when I saw someone walk past the doorway out of the corner of my eye. It was just a glimpse, half a second at most, but clear as day. A tall, thin man wearing khaki dress pants, a white long-sleeve shirt, and a green knitted vest. He had glasses, slicked back hair, and a gaunt face, like someone who'd been sick for a long time. He didn't look at me. He just walked by. I froze. It didn't register at first, not fully. I spit the toothpaste out, wiped my mouth, and stepped into the hall, half expecting to see one of my wife's uncles or something. But no one in that house looked like that. And then it hit me. My wife was the only one who had a room down that hallway. Everyone else was upstairs. And that man, whoever he was walking straight toward our bedroom. My stomach dropped. I hurried out into the hallway, half expecting to hear the door open. A creak of the knob, something, but the door was closed. And it hadn't opened. I would have heard it. That house was old. Every door groaned when you so much as touched it. The hallway was empty. The dining room was empty. The living room, which was just beyond the hallway, was empty. I checked every possible place someone could have gone. There was no one. No footsteps, no sound, no movement, nothing. At that point, my brain went into overdrive. Did I really see that? Maybe it was a shadow? A weird trick of the light? But no way. I saw him. I saw the fabric of his vest, the way his glasses caught the dim light from the hall. He was real. I swallowed hard and went to our bedroom, shutting the living room door behind me. I hesitated for a second before opening the bedroom door, half expecting to see something on the other side. But no, just my wife, curled up under the blankets, fast asleep. I stood there for a second, just listening to my own pulse hammering in my ears, then walked over and shook her shoulder. She groaned and squinted at me. "What?" I whispered. "Did your dad's brother or anyone come over late?" She frowned, still half asleep. "No." "Why?" I hesitated. My mouth was dry. I licked my lips, trying to put it into words without sounding insane. "I saw someone in the hall." That woke her up a little more. She blinked, sitting up. "What do you mean?" I told her, every detail. The clothes, the glasses, the way he just walked by, never looking at me. She stared at me for a second. Then, in the groggiest, most matter-of-fact voice, she said, "Oh yeah, that's the old man. He just walks around, never does anything." I felt my stomach flip. I just stood there staring at her. She flopped back down and pulled the blanket up to her chin, like I hadn't just told her the most batshit terrifying thing I'd ever seen. I swallowed. "Excuse me?" She sighed, exasperated. "The old man. My mom and dad have seen him. I saw him a couple times growing up. He's just there. He doesn't bother anyone." I sat down on the edge of the bed. My hands were ice cold. "And you didn't think to tell me about this?" She gave me this look, like I was the one being weird. "You don't believe in ghosts. You would have just said I was messing with you." And then, just like that, she rolled over and went right back to sleep. Like it was nothing. Like this was just a regular Tuesday night. I sat there for a long time, staring at the closed bedroom door, listening, waiting. But nothing happened. I barely slept that night. We left a couple days later, and I didn't bring it up again. I didn't want to talk about it, because no matter how much I try to explain it away, no matter how many times I tell myself that I must have been tired, or my eyes played tricks on me, or that maybe, it was just some weird, sleep-deprived hallucination, I know what I saw, and I know he was real. Story 4. I used to work nights at a hospital, cleaning and restocking supplies in the OR. Nothing glamorous, just part of the background crew, making sure everything stayed sterile and ready for the next shift. The work was quiet, repetitive. Most nights I was alone in the halls, pushing my cart from room to room, replacing gauze, checking the suction machines, making sure the anesthesia carts were stocked. This happened in October 2014, just a few days before Halloween. I remember because the hospital had those cheap paper decorations stuck to the glass doors, little smiling ghosts and black cats. It was cold that night, the first real snow of the season just starting to come down. The parking lot lights outside made everything look yellow and blurry, like the world itself was dimming. I was near the end of my shift, tired, ready to go home, just making my last round before clocking out. The OR wing was quiet. Only a few emergency surgeries were scheduled overnight, and none of them were in this section. The overhead lights were on, but they always seemed dimmer at night, like they were holding back the dark instead of actually lighting the place up. The air smelled like disinfectant and cold metal. If you've ever worked in a hospital, you know that smell. It's got a weight to it, like it sticks to your skin. I turned into one of the supply corridors, just a narrow hall lined with carts full of clean linens, surgical trays, and disposable supplies. I was about halfway down when something clattered to the floor. It wasn't loud, but it echoed, sharp and sudden, in the empty hall. I stopped, looked. A stainless steel bedpan lay on the tile, spinning slightly before coming to a stop. I frowned. The bedpans were stacked on the top shelf of one of the carts, but they weren't loose. They were always placed neatly, nested together. No reason for one to just fall. Maybe whoever restocked the cart earlier didn't push them in all the way. Made sense. Hospitals are busy places. I sighed, bent down, picked it up. It was cold. I gave it a quick wipe down with a sanitizing cloth, dried it, and placed it back on the stack. This time I made sure it was secure. I even jostled the cart a little to see if it would budge. It didn't. Satisfied, I moved on. I finished my rounds, took my time because I only had about 20 minutes left before I could leave. When I looped back to the supply corridor, I felt uneasy. It was too quiet. Now I know that sounds stupid. It's a hospital. It's always quiet in the OR at night. But this was different. Normally you hear things, distant voices, the hum of machines, the occasional beep of a monitor. But in that hallway, there was nothing. The silence pressed in. Even my own footsteps sounded muffled, like the air itself was thick. I was about 10 feet away from the cart when it happened again. The bedpan fell. It didn't just drop. It slammed against the floor, hard enough to make me jump. I stopped dead. My hands went cold. My stomach dropped. Because I knew I had secured it. I knew there was no reason for it to fall again. For a second, I just stood there staring at it. The steel reflected the overhead light, a dull gleam against the tile. My mouth felt dry. Then something changed. The air. It was subtle at first, just a shift, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees. But then I felt it. Pressure, like someone was standing behind me, close enough that if I took a step back, I'd bump into them. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened. And in that silence, I heard it, right next to my ear. A breath, not mine. It was shallow, ragged, like someone struggling to breathe. The hair on my arm stood up. I turned my head, slow, careful, expecting to see someone. But there was nothing, just the empty hallway stretching behind me. The bedpan lay at my feet, still rocking slightly from the impact. I couldn't move. My brain scrambled for explanations. Air currents, vibrations from a nearby elevator, a draft from a door opening somewhere. But none of those things explained the breath. None of those things explained the feeling of someone standing behind me. I swallowed hard and crouched down, keeping my movements slow, deliberate. I picked up the bedpan again. It felt heavier this time, like the steel was holding on to something. My hands were shaking as I wiped it down, dried it, but I didn't put it back on the cart. I couldn't. I placed it on the lower shelf instead, tucked safely where it couldn't fall. Then, without looking back, without checking the hallway one last time, I turned and walked away. I didn't rush, didn't run. I kept my pace steady, my breath even, because I knew, deep in my gut, I was being watched, and I didn't want to give whatever was back there the satisfaction of knowing I knew. I clocked out 5 minutes early that night. Never told anyone. Never asked if anyone else had experienced something like that in the OR, but I never took that hallway on my last rounds again. Story 5, I work at a mid-sized office building. Nothing fancy, just a 2-story structure with beige walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and the occasional mouse sighting in the break room. I've been here for about 3 years, working the late shift in the data entry department. The office is usually quiet by the time I clock in, with only a handful of people still lingering. Most of the staff heads out by 5, leaving just a few night owls like me to wrap up the day's work. It was a Wednesday night, nothing unusual about it. The sky outside was pitch black, and the parking lot was mostly empty except for a few scattered cars. I had been at my desk for a couple of hours, chipping away at spreadsheets, when I decided to take a break. I made my way to the restroom, which was tucked away at the far end of the hallway near the stairwell. This particular bathroom was one of the older ones in the building. The tiles were cracked in some spots. The ventilation fan made an awful rattling sound, and the overhead light had a bad habit of flickering at random. I stepped inside and locked the stall door behind me. As I sat there, I thought about something my coworker Maria had said earlier that week. "You ever notice how the lights flicker in this place?" she had asked, her voice hushed. I had nodded, not thinking much of it. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "My grandma always told me that flickering lights mean spirits are nearby. If a light ever starts acting weird, you should ask the ghost to prove itself." I had laughed at the time. "Yeah, right. Swear to God." She had been completely serious. "Try it sometime." I hadn't thought about it again, until now. After finishing up, I stepped out of the stall and went to the sink to wash my hands. The mirror above the sink was slightly cracked in the corner, distorting my reflection just enough to be unsettling. The fluorescent light above the sink flickered weakly, buzzing like an insect trapped inside the fixture. I smirked. Well, if this is a ghost, then make the light blink 3 times. I said it as a joke, a stupid offhand remark meant for no one but myself. But the second the words left my mouth, the flickering stopped. I froze. The light steadied, humming softly. I exhaled a small laugh, shaking my head. Coincidence. Just a bad ballast, nothing more. Then, without warning, the light clicked off completely. I stood there, my hands dripping wet, my reflection swallowed by darkness. A few seconds passed. Then the light snapped back on. 1. The air in the bathroom felt different, heavy, thick, like something was pressing down on me. The light flickered again, then off, a heartbeat of silence. Then it turned back on. 2. I backed up toward the door, my breath shallow. The light clicked off again. This time it stayed off longer. The darkness felt alive, shifting around me. I couldn't move. And then, click. The light came back on. 3. Something was in there with me. I felt it, the weight of unseen eyes pressing into me. The air was ice cold, my breath coming out in short, shaky bursts. I didn't wait for anything else to happen. I bolted. I yanked open the door and practically sprinted down the hallway, my heart slamming against my ribs. The office was dead quiet, the sound of my own footsteps echoing against the walls. When I reached my desk, Maria was still there, sipping a Coke and scrolling on her phone. She looked up at me, raising an eyebrow. "You good?" I tried to answer, but my mouth was too dry. I swallowed, my hands still trembling. "The bathroom." Her face shifted. "Which one?" "The one by the stairwell." She set her drink down, eyes widening slightly. "That one?" I nodded. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she sighed, rubbing her arms like she was suddenly cold. "I told you not to mess with it," she muttered. I never used that bathroom again. Story 6, I work the night shift at a psychiatric facility, which means I see a lot of strange things, but nothing that ever made me question reality. That changed one Saturday morning when I was getting a patient ready for dialysis. It was snowing hard, the kind of heavy, wet snow that soaks your clothes and turns the roads into slushy death traps. The kind of snow that makes people stay in bed a little longer, hoping for an excuse to call out of work. But I had a job to do. The building was quiet for once, with most of the patients either asleep or watching the weather updates on the old box TVs mounted in the corners of their rooms. I walked down the dim hallway, past the nurse's station, and poked my head into the patient's room. His name was Mr. Harris. He was in his 60s, a diabetic with kidney failure, which meant dialysis 3 times a week. He was a good guy, always polite, always grateful for any help he got. That morning, he was sitting up in bed, eating his breakfast off one of those plastic trays, watching the news. I glanced at the whiteboard on the wall, checking to see which nurse was assigned to him. That's when I saw her. She was standing right next to his bed, leaning against the railing like she belonged there. A beautiful black woman, maybe in her early 30s, with a little afro and deep brown eyes. She wore a brown leather jacket over a pair of jeans and some really nice boots. Boots that didn't look cheap. She was holding a book, something small and worn, and just as I turned my head, she closed it, resting her hand on top of it. She smiled at me, warm and familiar, like I was an old friend. It was one of those smiles that instantly makes you feel at ease, like she saw right through me and decided I was okay. I smiled back, nodded, and turned to leave. I assumed she was family, maybe his daughter, a niece, a close friend, someone who cared enough to visit him early on a snowy morning. Most patients didn't get visitors at all, and if they did, it was usually later in the day. I went to find the nurse in charge of Mr. Harris to go over the standard checklist before I could take him down for his treatment. She confirmed that he was alert and oriented, meaning he wasn't confused, not hallucinating, not delusional. That was important because I needed to know he could follow instructions and communicate properly during dialysis. Once we got all the clearance out of the way, I went back to his room. The woman was gone. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she stepped out to use the bathroom or grab a coffee from the vending machine. So I asked him, "Do you want to wait for your visitor to come back before we go?" He looked at me, confused. "What visitor?" I frowned. "The woman who was here a few minutes ago. Brown leather jacket, jeans, had a little afro. She was standing right next to you reading a book." His face stayed blank. "I haven't had a visitor since Wednesday." I felt something cold creep up my spine. I looked at the empty space beside his bed where she had been standing. There was no way he could have missed her. She was right there, right next to him. I searched for a logical explanation, but my brain kept hitting a dead end. She wasn't a nurse. Our staff wore scrubs. She wasn't another patient. No one on the floor matched her description, and patients didn't just wander into other people's rooms. Family members had to check in at the front desk, and visitors weren't allowed on the floor without clearance. Even if she had somehow snuck in, where did she go? I had only been gone a few minutes. The hallway was empty. The doors at the end of the unit were locked and required a key card to exit. I swallowed hard. Something about the whole thing made me feel off. I thought about telling Mr. Harris what I saw, asking if he had a relative who had passed away, maybe a daughter, a sister, a wife, but the look on his face told me not to. He was already sick, already dealing with enough. If I told him I saw a woman standing by his bed, one that wasn't there, what good would that do? So I shook it off, pretended like it never happened. "All right," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Let's get you downstairs." I wheeled him out of the room, down the quiet hallway, and into the elevator, feeling the weight of an unseen presence pressing against me the entire time. I never saw her again, but I never forgot her smile. Story 7. I worked night shifts at a hospital. Been doing it for years. You'd think after a while, you'd get used to the quiet, the strange sounds, the occasional bad feeling in your gut when you walk past a dark hallway alone. But let me tell you something. There are places in hospitals that don't ever feel right, no matter how long you work there. There's one place in particular. It used to be a holding room for OR patients. Now it's mostly storage. In the mornings, we keep it cleared in case they need to hold a patient temporarily. After 11 a.m., though, it turns into a dumping ground for stretchers and spare beds until the next day. But sometimes when someone passes away on this floor, we clear it out for the family to have some privacy. No one else is supposed to go in during that time. A few months before this happened, a woman died in that unit during a GI procedure. She wasn't old, mid-40s maybe. Unexpected deaths like that always send ripples through a hospital. The whole unit was shaken. Her family flooded the place. So many people, they had to take turns going in to see her body. They wailed, they prayed, they sat in silence. When they finally left, it was well past visiting hours. That was months ago. But I think that night, she never really left. It was just past midnight when I had to bring in a clean bed. It wasn't unusual. I did it all the time. I wheeled the bed down the hall, the wheels squeaking slightly as I turned the corner. The doors to the unit were locked as always. To get in, you had to press a button. When you did, the doors would let out this loud, obnoxious buzz before they slid open. I hit the button. Bezazast. The doors unlocked, and I pushed through. Inside, it was dim. The only light came from the windows behind the secretary's desk. The stretchers were lined up against the far wall, some covered with sheets, others bare. The air felt thick, like it hadn't moved all day. I parked the bed near the wall, making sure it was out of the way, and that's when I saw it. A flash of blue near the secretary's desk. Just a quick glimpse, like someone standing there, barely visible in the shadows. I stopped moving. Someone was in here. For a second, I relaxed. It had to be one of my coworkers. There was a woman on my shift who sometimes came in here to take a break. She wore baby blue scrubs and she liked the quiet. I figured maybe she'd slipped in before me. Maybe I just hadn't noticed her. "Hey," I called out. No answer. I took a few steps toward the desk. "You in here?" Nothing. I walked around the desk. Empty. I stood there for a moment, frowning. That didn't make sense. I knew I had seen something. Maybe she had just stepped out, but that didn't make sense either. The doors make a loud noise when they open. If she had left, I would have heard it. I turned, scanning the room. The stretchers were lined up just as they had been when I walked in. The bed I'd brought in was where I left it. The air was still heavy, like something was pressing down on it. Then, a sound, a small, soft sound, like fabric shifting. I turned back to the desk, and I saw her, standing right there, on the other side. She was barely visible in the darkness. The glow from the window outlined her form, a woman in a hospital gown, pale blue with tiny pink specks. She wasn't moving. She was just there. I felt my breath stop in my chest. Every single hair on my body stood up. Because here's the thing, there was no one on the unit wearing a hospital gown. I took a slow step back. My heartbeat was so loud in my ears I thought it would burst. The woman didn't move. She didn't say anything. I couldn't even see her face, just the outline of her, standing behind the desk, her head slightly tilted. I wanted to turn and run, but my legs weren't working. The air around me was ice cold now. And then, she took a step forward. I didn't wait. I spun and lunged for the door. My hand slammed against the button. Bees! Shh. The door unlocked, but it felt like it was taking forever to open. I didn't dare turn around. I didn't want to know if she was right behind me. The second there was enough space, I shoved myself through, nearly tripping over my own feet. The doors slid shut behind me. I stood there in the hallway, gasping for breath. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the railing along the wall to steady myself. I turned, staring at the doors. Nothing. No sound. No movement. I didn't go back in. I couldn't. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I had imagined it. That maybe, just maybe, the darkness and exhaustion had made me see something that wasn't there. But then I remembered something. The woman who had died months ago, she had been wearing a pale blue hospital gown with tiny pink specks. I haven't gone back into that unit alone since. Story 8. I don't believe in ghosts. Let me just say that up front. I mean, yeah, I've heard stories. My family, like most families, has their fair share of weird tales. Things moving on their own, footsteps in empty halls, that kind of thing. But me? I've always figured there's a logical explanation for everything. Always. At least I used to think that. This happened years ago, but I still remember every damn detail. It was my cousin Mark's room, the so-called haunted room in my uncle's house. Everyone in the family whispered about it, how Mark always said he felt like he wasn't alone, how the TV would turn on by itself, how he would wake up to things knocked over that were perfectly fine the night before. I thought it was bullshit, and I still thought it was bullshit that night when I stayed over. Mark was out of town for a few days and my uncle let me crash in his room while visiting. I didn't even think about the stories when I tossed my bag on the floor and sat on his bed. It was a small room, just a desk, a closet, and a rickety old CD player sitting on a shelf. One of those cheap boombox style ones with a top-loading lid and built-in speakers. It looked ancient, the kind of thing that belonged in a junk pile. I was lying on the bed scrolling through my phone when it happened. Out of nowhere, music started playing. Loud. I jumped, nearly dropping my phone. It was the CD player. The damn thing had turned on by itself. Now look, I've seen stuff like this before. Old electronics short-circuiting, power surges, whatever. My first thought was that maybe Mark had left a CD inside, and somehow a power glitch made it turn on. Annoying, but not terrifying. I got up, went over to the shelf and pressed the power button. Nothing. It was already off, but the music was still playing. A deep, slow, scratchy song I didn't recognize. Something about it felt wrong, like the sound was warped, slightly off key. I pressed the stop button. Nothing. I held the power button down. Nothing. Okay, maybe the buttons were jammed. Fine. I bent down and yanked the plug out of the wall. The little red light went dark. The speakers should have gone silent, but they didn't. The music kept playing. Loud. And that was when the CD player started to move. Not slide, not shake. It started bouncing, like it was dancing. I stood there frozen, watching this old, busted CD player vibrate on the shelf, thumping like something inside it was alive. The whole shelf rattled. The music, it wasn't just playing, it was distorting, twisting, the sound stretching and warping like a dying cassette tape. I backed up. The CD player jumped. I swear to God, it jumped off the shelf and hit the floor. It should have broken, but it didn't. It kept playing. I grabbed my bag, my shoes, hell, I think I even grabbed Mark's pillow, and bolted. I ran down the hallway, straight to the living room where my uncle was dozing off on the couch. He woke up to me panting, looking like I'd seen a ghost. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he asked. I could barely get the words out. "The CD player. It turned on by itself. I unplugged it. I swallowed. It wouldn't stop playing." My uncle just stared at me. Then after a long moment, he sighed. "Told Mark to get rid of that damn thing." That was all he said. I didn't go back in that room. Not to sleep, not to grab my stuff. My uncle had to get it for me the next morning. And the CD player, it was still on the floor, still playing, unplugged. That was the last time I ever set foot in Mark's room, and the last time I ever said I didn't believe in ghosts. Story 9, I was 12 when my uncle got married in what was probably the fanciest hotel in our small city. It wasn't anything impressive by big city standards, but for us, it was the place. The kind of hotel people booked for weddings, high school reunions, or the occasional business conference. The kind of place everyone had at least heard rumors about. The hotel was supposed to be haunted. That was just common knowledge. I don't remember exactly what the story was. No one ever really knew the details. There were just whispers, mentions of something strange happening on the upper floors. A lady in white, a crying sound at night, lights flickering, doors opening by themselves. The usual. I wasn't the kind of kid who was obsessed with ghosts or anything, but my younger cousins were, and when you're 12 and have an opportunity to do something mildly reckless at a wedding, you take it. There were 4 of us. Me, my 10-year-old brother, my 9-year-old cousin, and her 6-year-old brother. We spent most of the reception bored out of our minds, picking at food and avoiding being forced to dance by ants. Eventually, one of us, I don't even remember who, brought up the ghost story. That was all it took. We left the ballroom and started wandering the hotel, walking up and down hallways, looking for something. None of us even knew what exactly we were looking for. A cold spot? A flickering light? A full-body apparition? We were just kids, running on pure curiosity, too dumb to be scared. It wasn't long before my brother and youngest cousin chickened out. We had made it up to the 6th floor when my brother whispered, "I don't like this," and my little cousin grabbed his sleeve and nodded. "I want to go back," he mumbled. We weren't going to force them. They bolted for the elevator, and then it was just me and my 9-year-old cousin. We didn't even hesitate. We kept going. We took the elevator to the top floor. The doors slid open with a chime, and we stepped out into the hallway. It was empty, silent. We walked forward, glancing down each hallway as we passed. The air felt thick up there, like the kind of quiet you get in a room right after someone leaves. My cousin grabbed my sleeve, squeezing it a little tighter every time we passed another empty hallway. And then we saw her, a woman. She was ahead of us, maybe 20 feet down the hall, just turning the corner to enter one of the rooms. She had long black hair and was wearing a white dress. Not a wedding dress, but something simple, like a sundress. She moved like she was completely unaware of us, stepping into the room and pulling the door shut behind her. My cousin let out a tiny breath. "I thought we were the only ones up here," she whispered. "Guess not." Neither of us were scared at that point. We figured she was just a guest. Sure, it was weird that she was up there alone, but it was a hotel. People came and went. It didn't mean anything. So we shrugged it off and kept looking around. Eventually, we got bored of the top floor and decided to go back down. We took the elevator to the 5th floor, stepping out into the hallway, and we saw her again. Same long black hair, same white dress, walking out of a different room. Not just a different room, a room on an entirely different floor. I stopped so fast that my cousin bumped into me. "What?" she hissed. My mouth was dry. "That's her," I whispered. She didn't even have to ask what I meant. The woman stepped into the hallway, same slow, deliberate pace as before, and started walking away from us. Not toward another room, not toward the elevator, just down the hall. My cousin grabbed my wrist so hard it hurt. I could hear my own breathing in my ears. hear the silence of the hallway stretching out in front of us. We weren't supposed to be there. We weren't supposed to see this. I don't know if she heard us, but at that exact moment, she stopped walking. She didn't turn around, didn't move, just stopped. I felt a jolt of pure physical terror shoot through my chest. I don't know how long we stood there, frozen, before my cousin whispered, "Run!" And we did. We bolted for the elevator, slamming the button over and over like our lives depended on it. The doors opened and we stumbled inside, gasping, hitting the button for the lobby. As the doors started to close, I couldn't stop myself from looking up. The woman was standing at the end of the hallway, still facing away from us. But I swear to God, her head was turning, not her body, just her head, turning toward us. The elevator doors slid shut. We hit the lobby and ran straight into the wedding reception, panting, probably pale as hell. My aunt saw us and frowned. "Where have you two been?" Neither of us answered. We just stood there shaking, staring at each other, knowing we had both seen the same thing. I never saw another ghost after that, but I never stopped believing. Story 10. I got a house-sitting gig from a friend of mine, Emily. She was heading out of town for a few days and needed someone to watch her two dogs. She knew I hated being alone in big empty houses, but she promised her place wasn't creepy. Plus the dogs would keep me company. I figured, why not? A quiet weekend, free food, and I'd get to binge watch whatever I wanted on her big-ass TV. Emily lived in one of those older houses in a neighborhood that was mostly retirees and young couples. The kind of place where nothing ever really happened. I had been over a few times, so it wasn't unfamiliar, but staying alone in someone else's house always felt different. Like you were borrowing a life that wasn't yours. The first night was uneventful. I ordered some takeout, let the dogs out one last time, and settled into the couch with a blanket. The dogs, Max and Bella, curled up beside me. I wasn't tired yet, so I decided to get a drink of water before heading to bed. I walked into the kitchen, filled a glass from the fridge, and took a sip. That's when I heard it, a soft clink against the tile floor. I looked down and saw my necklace lying there. I frowned. I had been wearing that necklace all day. My mom gave it to me years ago, and the clasp was a pain in the ass to fasten. I bent down, picked it up, and instinctively checked the clasp. Still buckled. I just stood there, holding it in my palm. The chain hadn't snapped, the clasp wasn't broken, and yet it had somehow come off my neck and landed at my feet. I swallowed, suddenly feeling cold despite the warmth of the house. Maybe the clasp had been loose, and I just hadn't noticed. Maybe it had slipped off and refastened itself midair, which didn't make any sense, but I didn't have a better explanation. Trying to shake it off, I put the necklace back on, double-checking that it was secure. Then I turned off the kitchen light and went back to the couch. I don't know how long I was asleep before I woke up. I wasn't groggy, I didn't wake up slowly. I was just suddenly awake. The first thing I noticed was that the room wasn't dark anymore. The lamp in the corner was on. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to remember if I had left it on. I hadn't. I was sure of that. I had turned it off before settling in. I sat up, heart starting to pick up speed. The dogs were gone. They had been right next to me, but now the room was empty. I strained my ears, but the house was silent. Then, psh, psh, psh. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was the damn air freshener, one of those automatic spray ones that go off every so often. Only instead of one spray, it had done 3 in rapid succession. I turned my head toward it, my pulse hammering in my ears. Something was off. The house felt wrong. Not just empty, but wrong. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. Like I was being watched. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the air freshener was broken. Maybe I had left the light on and just didn't remember. Maybe the dogs had just wandered off to another room. But my gut wasn't buying it. I forced myself to stand up, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stay put. I walked toward the hallway, peeking around the corner. Darkness. I whispered, "Max? Bella?" Nothing. I should have heard their paws on the hardwood. I should have at least heard breathing. But the house was silent. I took a cautious step forward, my bare feet making no sound against the floor. My skin felt tight, like the air itself was pressing in on me. Another step. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance. Nothing. Just the couch, the blanket I had been sleeping under, the lamp casting soft yellow light. But something was wrong with the light. It was flickering. Not the usual kind of flickering from a bad bulb. It was dimming, then brightening. Dimming, then brightening. Like something was moving in front of it, blocking it. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see. But I did. There in the dim light, just at the edge of the living room, where the hallway met the kitchen, something moved. Not a person, not an animal. Just darkness. A shape that wasn't supposed to be there. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stood there frozen as the air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing in on me from all sides. The light flickered again, and in that brief moment of brightness, I saw it. Something standing in the hallway. Tall, too tall. Its body was wrong, twisted, like it didn't know how to stand properly. I didn't see a face. I don't think it had one, but I felt it looking at me, watching. I sucked in a breath, and in that instant, the light went out completely. Pitch black, the kind of darkness that swallows everything. And then, psh, psh, psh. The air freshener again, right next to me. I ran. I don't even remember grabbing my keys. I don't remember putting on my shoes. I just remember the sound of my own breathing, ragged and terrified, as I threw open the front door and sprinted to my car. I didn't stop, not until I was miles away. Emily called me the next morning, asking why I had left. I didn't know what to tell her. I just said, I can't stay there. She didn't press. But before we hung up, she hesitated and then asked, Hey, did you let the dogs out last night? My stomach dropped. I had never found them. And when she got home, she swore the back door was still locked. They were inside. They had been inside the whole time. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.